security cooperation, as illustrated in the additional sites under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement and the Balikatan exercises, among others. This afternoon, we are joined by our only treaty ally and one of the staunchest supporters of the 2016 arbitral victory, the United States, to deliver her keynote address on strengthening the US-Philippine alliance in the age of uncertainty. It is our honor to welcome United States Ambassador to the Philippines, Her Excellency Mary Kay Carlson. Let's give her a round of applause.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here with StratBase, a great partner of the U.S. Embassy, and this distinguished group to discuss the U.S.-Philippine alliance as part of the commemoration to mark the 7-year anniversary of the Philippines' victory at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. There is another anniversary that the United States and the Philippines are celebrating this year, the 75th anniversary of the Fulbright Program, which is the flagship international scholarship program sponsored by the U.S. government. It was established by J. William Fulbright and the United States Congress with an ambitious goal to increase understanding and support friendly, peaceful relations between the people of the United States and the people of other countries. The Fulbright program in the Philippines has the distinction of being the longest continuously running Fulbright program in the world, a testament to the strong and enduring ties between our two countries. So what is the connection between these two anniversaries, you might ask? Well, let me read you a quote from Senator Fulbright, who was the longest serving chairperson of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and by coincidence, a native son of my home state of Arkansas. Senator Fulbright said, and I quote, "International law provides us with stability and order and a means of predicting the behavior of those with whom we have reciprocal legal obligations. International law draws from centuries of agreements and standards of conduct governing relations between sovereign states. It underpins the rules-based international order, a system that benefits all nations, small, medium, and large." 8 years ago this month, on July 7th, 2015, the great Philippine diplomat, Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Albert del Rosario, whose legacy we honor today, addressed a distinguished panel of jurists in the Philippine-China Law of the Sea Convention arbitration, where he cited the equalizing power of international law. International law, he said, allows the weak to challenge the powerful on an equal footing, confident in the conviction that principles trump power, that law triumphs over force, and that right prevails over might. Like the Philippines, the United States believes that all countries, large and small, should play by the same rules. The 2016 arbitral ruling, which Secretary del Rosario championed, emanates from the rules-based international order that has provided peace, stability, and prosperity for our nations for decades. The 1982 Law of the Sea Convention, whose provisions the arbitral tribunal applied and vindicated, is fundamental to the peaceful and predictable use of the world's oceans. I'm sure that I don't need to tell this or explain anything to this audience how important peace and stability in the South China Sea are and how vital they are to the entire world, including to the global economy. We have a strategic interest in upholding the rights of all countries in the maritime domain, including the rights of South China Sea claimants to exercise their sovereign rights and jurisdiction in their exclusive economic zones and continental shelves, and of all users of the sea to exercise freedom of navigation and overflight and other lawful uses of the seas. The South China Sea has become one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, with total annual trade estimated to be more than $3 trillion. The South China Sea basin is estimated to hold 11 billion barrels of untapped oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, at least some of which is near Palawan. More than half of the globe's oil tankers pass through the South China Sea. The South China Sea also accounts for 12% of the global fish catch, which is estimated to gross 100 billion annually, or 5.5 trillion pesos, and which supports the livelihoods of 3.7 million people and the dietary requirements of millions more. The South China Sea is a key thoroughfare for undersea cables and is therefore pivotal for the continued secure flow of data. Clearly, the South China Sea matters to all of us. With the 2016 arbitral ruling, the Philippines secured a final and legally binding decision that validates the country's sovereign rights and jurisdiction over its exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, and a ruling that found that the PRC's maritime claims in the South China Sea were inconsistent with international law. In support of the tribunal's 2016 decision, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said, "The United States and our Indo-Pacific allies and partners are committed to preserving a system where goods, ideas, and people flow freely across land, sky, cyberspace, and the open seas." We applaud the tribunal's decision rejecting the PRC's putative claim to so-called historic rights in the South China Sea. With the arbitral ruling, international law won out, protecting a nation's sovereign and economic rights, just as Senator Fulbright said. In terms of U.S. policy regarding this vitally important region, I want to reiterate that the United States calls for all claimants to resolve territorial and maritime claims peacefully and in accordance with international law. We have consistently maintained that all South China Sea claimants should comport claims with international law, as reflected in the 1982 Law of the Sea Convention. So what is the United States doing to protect this critical maritime area? I would like to highlight 3 lines of effort that I think describe well U.S. policy in the South China Sea. First, our diplomacy. Together with like-minded partners like the Philippines and many other governments represented in this room, we are promoting respect for international law and the rules-based order, freedom of navigation and overflight, unimpeded commerce, and the need for peaceful settlement of disputes. Second, our maritime capacity building programs. We are supporting maritime capacity building programs for the region's militaries and maritime law enforcement agencies, including a robust array of programs right here in the Philippines. These programs enhance countries' maritime domain awareness and improve their ability to patrol their claims, actions which we believe further promote peace and stability. And third and finally, I want to highlight our own operations conducted by the U.S. military, including freedom of navigation operations and routine presence operations, which demonstrate that all countries have the right to fly, sail, and operate anywhere that international law allows. And we've been doing just that in the South China Sea and around the world on a daily basis for many, many years. I'd now like to share some thoughts on the key role played by the vitally important U.S.-Philippine relationship in preserving an Indo-Pacific region that is free, open, and prosperous. I was asked specifically to talk about strengthening the U.S.-Philippine alliance in the age of uncertainty. One of the ways the United States and the Philippines strengthen our alliance is by placing a premium on sustaining an international system based on international law. Our focus on international law is reflected in our foreign policies and can be seen in our enduring commitment to the U.S.-Philippine alliance based on the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty. We share a common vision for a region governed by the rule of law, freedom of navigation, and respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all nations. These shared values, with their echoes in the United Nations Charter, keep our alliance vibrant and meaningful even after 7 decades. The Philippines is our oldest treaty ally in East Asia, but age has not dimmed the vitality of our relationship. To this day, the ironclad U.S.-Philippine alliance provides a strong framework for how we work together to address common threats. It remains a bulwark in our regional security network. In a world beset by many uncertainties, our commitment to the U.S.-Philippine alliance is not one of them. When we look at Southeast Asia, from geography to demographics to the economy, we see that what happens in the Philippines is critical to what happens in the Indo-Pacific and around the world. Unfortunately, in the past few years, we have seen challenges to the rules-based order via provocations in the South China Sea. In February, for example, the Chinese Coast Guard used a laser device against the crew of a Philippines Coast Guard vessel. And 2 months later, a Chinese Coast Guard ship then blocked a Philippine patrol vessel with a group of journalists on board in the vicinity of Second Thomas Shoal. And just a few weeks ago, the Philippine Coast Guard reported an unsafe maneuver conducted by a China Coast Guard vessel. Such provocations, in addition to threatening freedom of navigation and oversight, have other consequences, including increased environmental degradation, reduced energy security, and less stable investment climate, all of which directly and negatively affect lives and livelihoods. To better respond to the full range of shared challenges, including natural disasters, the United States and the Philippines announced earlier this year our plans to accelerate the implementation of projects under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA, and to designate 4 new locations. We expect to allocate more than $107 million, or roughly 5.5 billion pesos, in infrastructure investments at EDCA locations by the end of this fiscal year. The EDCA enhancements provide a means for force modernization, and they also improve our combined forces interoperability. Under the agreement, U.S. forces may access EDCA locations in the Philippines on a rotational basis for security cooperation exercises, joint combined military training activities, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and other mutually agreed upon activities. I want to underscore here that the goal of EDCA is to strengthen the U.S.-Philippine alliance, which stands on its own and is not focused on any single threat, country, or issue. The United States has awarded the vast majority of contracts supporting EDCA construction to Philippine companies, generating economic growth in local communities and building lasting friendships between the United States and the Philippines. Current active projects employ scores of Philippine workers. The projects supported by EDCA funding also have a positive economic knock-on effect at the local level, as the growth in direct employment also means more indirect employment for small and medium-sized enterprises nearby. The United States, led by the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, is consulting local governments and communities near EDCA locations on potential community-based activities, including biodiversity conservation and energy security. Another way we are strengthening the U.S.-Philippine alliance is through a robust series of military engagements and activities, including the largest ever iteration of our premier bilateral military exercise, Balikatan, which this year saw 17,000 U.S. and Filipino troops exercising together and involved some 100 Australian Defense Force personnel and observers from 11 other countries. During President Marcos's trip to Washington, D.C., we also announced the establishment of our first ever bilateral defense guidelines. The publication of these guidelines may seem technical, but it is in fact a significant step in making sure that our alliance is able to meet 21st century security threats. I like to think of these guidelines as a sort of user's manual for our 7-decade-old mutual defense treaty, fostering a common understanding of our respective roles and responsibilities, and identifying priority areas for defense cooperation. If the Mutual Defense Treaty is the why that defines our alliance, the bilateral defense guidelines seek to explain the how by advancing our efforts to operationalize our commitments. In addition to being steadfast friends and ironclad allies, the United States and the Philippines are also committed economic partners. The arbitral ruling is an essential piece of that partnership too, as it provides the legal underpinnings for trade, investment, and all manner of economic activity. The Philippines has the right to fully leverage its resources in pursuit of economic growth and prosperity. As President Marcos has said, economic security is national security. The threat of IUU fishing and environmental degradation are 2 development challenges the United States and the Philippines are addressing together as partners. For the past 60 years, the U.S. government, through USAID, has worked with the Philippine government and local organizations to achieve shared development goals. Since 1961, USAID has invested nearly 290 billion pesos to support Philippine development priorities. USAID actively works with the Philippines to fight IUU fishing, protect the environment, and respond to the effects of climate change. We are committed to expanding trade and investment between our two countries to strengthen our economies. The United States is already the Philippines' largest export market and among the country's largest investors. These commercial ties have created hundreds of thousands of Filipino jobs. Bilateral trade hit records the past 2 years, and we expect to hit a new record this year. American companies are among the Philippines' largest and oldest investors, private employers, and taxpayers. Our companies create wealth and jobs, but also contribute other long-term benefits, such as workforce training and technology transfer. An important outcome of our president's meeting in Washington in early May was the announcement by President Biden of the first of its kind presidential trade and investment mission that he plans to dispatch to the Philippines. Led by the U.S. Department of Commerce, this mission will focus on priority sectors such as the Philippines' innovation economy, clean energy transition, critical minerals, and agriculture and food security. What makes our alliance and economic and development partnership work? Our people-to-people ties. It is clear that the positive tone in our relationship and our strong friendship is set at the very top. We were honored to hear President Marcos say that he cannot imagine the Philippines' future without a close bond with the United States. And America feels exactly the same way about the Philippines. U.S.-Philippine people-to-people ties have flourished thanks to programs such as the Fulbright Scholarship Program. But government-sponsored programs are just the tip of the iceberg. Every year, more than 3,000 Filipinos head to the United States to study at some of the world's leading colleges and universities, including law schools. The friendships among the peoples of our nations, the free flow of ideas, and the value we place on democracy and the rule of law, that is what undergirds the U.S.-Philippine alliance, what keeps it strong and resilient. Ultimately, our alliance is guided by our enduring commitment to democratic values. Our shared reverence for the rule of law is why we continue to strive together for peace, stability, and prosperity in the South China Sea, the Indo-Pacific, and beyond. And it is why we take time to commemorate the arbitral ruling, a victory for the rules-based international order that benefits all nations equally, regardless of size. I want to thank StratBase and Dindo again for this opportunity, for inviting me here to speak to you today. I am confident that the efforts we undertake together will continue to strengthen the U.S.-Philippine relationship as friends, partners, and allies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mary Kay Carlson. We are pleased to introduce our next speaker, Colonel Raymond Powell of the United States Air Force. Currently, he is with the Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation of Project Mushu in Stanford University, California, United States. Today, he will talk about public opinion as a powerful tool against gray zone operations. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Colonel Raymond Powell.
So it's really a pleasure to be back in Manila. I'm really happy to be here. I thank you, Dindo, for inviting me. And it's really an honor to be among such distinguished speakers. 7 ambassadors, that's quite a lineup. And one of the common themes that I heard throughout all of the speeches, especially from the ambassadors, is the commitment to these common ideas, these common principles: non-confrontation and cooperation, peaceful resolution of disputes, stability. All of these things are things that are very important to the international order. All of these things are things that China also desires. They would like to be non-confrontational and peaceful, and they would like to have stability. The difference is that we would like those things to be based on international law and the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal. And that's why what China does in the gray zone is so important to understanding how we get from where we are to where we want to be. Because I'm going to say something really profound here. Go ahead and write this down. Gray zone operators thrive when the zone is gray. I know. You can go ahead and trademark that one. But that's why Sea Light, the outcome of the Gordian Knot Center's Project Myoshu, Sea Light, that's why we say light up the maritime gray zone. And ultimately we do that because we want to engage the public. We want to help build resilience into all of our nations so that we can withstand the gray zone actor. Next slide, please. So we got our start back about this time last year there at Stanford, and I have to give a lot of credit to StratBase and for helping us get started. This is actually our fourth time talking to StratBase audiences. Our first time was back in November, and that went fairly unremarked upon. And then in January, we had sort of reached the point where we were ready to start sharing some of the information that through commercial sources we had gained. And so in the process of talking about how our project was going, we said, and here's an example of where this Philippine Navy ship went out to Scarborough Shoal and was met by the Chinese Coast Guard ship. And afterwards, I still remember Joyce standing up saying, that was very interesting. And that gave us the clue that, wow, what we're doing here, maybe we're on the right track. There is an appetite out there for this kind of information. And that brought us through a pretty interesting 6 months since then. As you can see, there's been a little bit of attention on some of the things that we've been putting out. And that has led us to Sea Light, which is where we are today. And now here's where I get to make an announcement. Next slide, please. We are today, here at this forum, launching our website. And so you can go there right now. If you go to sealight.live, you will see our website. And this is going to be the start of where we sort of the next phase in our development in being a resource for people who want to understand how the gray zone works and how to sort of respond to it. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? Well, first of all, we think that it's very important to build this common understanding of what the maritime gray zone is and how a gray zone actor works in it. And by doing so, that helps build into all of our societies a resilience against it. You know, those of us in this room come from democratic societies, and we are empowered by our people. Earlier today, we had a discussion about the public opinion and the role that it plays. Our leaders, our elected leaders, our government leaders, they need the support of the people to be able to stand up. Otherwise, the people don't understand why you're making problems. Why are you complicating the relationship? Well, they need to know what's happening so that they can support our leadership as they make hard decisions to push back. Ultimately, that builds up a resilience within our societies. But the other thing I think that's really important, and all of these ambassadors who spoke today are testament to the fact that a country like the Philippines, and I'm going to say this, a country like the Philippines, which has a gray zone problem unlike others, right? Maybe it's like in kind, but it's not like in degree. The Philippines' gray zone challenge is maybe a level higher than others because of the way that there's actually a Chinese military base with a port and airfield in the Philippines EEZ. There are daily confrontations between, say, maritime militia and Philippine fishermen. There are regular confrontations between Philippine security forces and Chinese security forces. The Philippines has a special degree of vulnerability to gray zone tactics. And frankly, those of us who are not Filipino by blood, so some of us feel like we're being adopted, those of us who are not Filipino, we owe the Philippines a great debt because the Philippines has taken steps that are bold steps, beginning in 2016, actually back in 2013, with the Arbitral Tribunal case, where they faced up against the maelstrom. And they continue to take risks for their own national security, but it benefits us as well because we get to see, when we see these pictures come back from the West Philippine Sea, what the gray zone crisis really is. And we need this information so that we can inform our own populations. And that's why I say it's not just moral support, we need to be giving material support. We need to be finding ways to support the Philippines in ways that they can build up their capacity so that they can begin to push back more effectively. And ultimately, what we hope to do, of course, is to deter China's aggression. We want China to have to recalculate and say, it's not in our national interest to fight with everybody all the time over everything, everywhere, right? At some point, we should pick our battles, and maybe we don't need to pick this one, because this one is costing us a lot, and we're not really getting that much out of it. So that's ultimately the goal of this, is to deter that gray zone actor. Next slide, please. So what we're offering in our website is going to be a portal. It's going to be not only a way to continue to get the news that we're, in the analysis that we've been putting out. It's not just a website embodiment of the Ray Powell website, the Ray Powell Twitter feed, excuse me. But it's also additional analysis. We're working right now on a series that we've just started called the Gray Zone Playbook, where we're trying to unpack how China uses various gray zone tactics so that when we see them, we can recognize them and say, oh, that's swarming. Oh, that's unsafe maneuvers. We can start to put a name to those things and recognize those are gray zone tactics. We're going to put together, so we're putting together a series of explainers, researchers. So if researchers want to go to our website, what we're trying to do is develop a compendium of things that they can draw from, kind of a first stop and say, here are a bunch of things to educate ourselves on what the contours of the South China Sea conflict, as it were, is. And we've just started, and more on this in a minute, a series of short form educational videos. This is really very much at the basic social media sharing kind of level, so that people can understand what's happening where. What exactly are the issues, for example, at Pagasa? What is an exclusive economic zone? Those kinds of things. And we'll be launching one of those in just a minute. Next slide, please. So a lot more to come. Today's website launch is not the end, it's the beginning. So we're looking to obviously improve the features. We would like to have a lot more sensors. We would like to have a lot more ways to gather information on the commercial side about what's happening in the West Philippine Sea and in the maritime gray zone. More research and scholarship coming out of some of our very fine students and scholars at Stanford University. And then, of course, we continue to develop partnerships with government, civil society, and industry, and academia. Next slide, please. So, Sealight.live, go there. I'm proud today to represent the Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation. And I'm also proud today to show you, in 3 minutes and 33 seconds, our very first Sealight 333 video. Thank you. Go ahead.
On July 12, 2016, an international court, or Arbitral Tribunal, ruled that China had no right to control the West Philippine Sea. This award sent an important message to China, the Philippines, and the entire world that might doesn't make right. What made it a big deal? Let me take 3 minutes and 33 seconds to explain in this first edition of our new educational video series, Sealight 333. Back in 2012, the Philippines discovered Chinese ships fishing at Scarborough Shoal. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Scarborough Shoal lies within the Philippines Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. That means the Philippines has the sovereign right to control fishing there. But even though China signed this law, it claims nearly all of the South China Sea as its own domestic waters, and that the international law it signed doesn't apply there. That's why it's trying to push other countries out of their legal EEZs, not just the Philippines, but also Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, and Vietnam. So when a Philippine Navy ship arrived to expel the Chinese fishing boats from Scarborough Shoal, it was met by China's own Coast Guard ships. After a long standoff, both sides eventually agreed to pull back. But China broke the agreement and took control of the shoal after the Philippine ships left. Something had to be done. So the Philippines decided to take China to court. They went to a special court called the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which was set up specifically to resolve disputes about international law. The Philippines asked the court to rule on three things. First, that China's 9-line claim has no basis in international law. Second, that none of the reefs or rocks in the Spratly Islands are big enough to generate their own EEZs, so China can't claim control that way either. And third, that China illegally interfered with the Philippines' right to control the resources, such as fishing, oil, and gas, that lie within its own EEZ. China refused to participate in the proceedings, but the court did its best to consider both sides anyway, and in 2016 ruled decisively in the Philippines' favor. Here's what the court decided. China's 9-line, the court said it has zero basis in international law. None. What about the Spratly Islands? The court said that because none of them can naturally sustain human life, none are technically islands under the law, even if a country artificially turns a reef into a military base. That means that nothing in the Spratly Island group qualifies for its own EEZ. Finally, the court ruled that China has repeatedly violated the Philippines' sovereign rights. First, in how it restricts lawful activities like fishing, oil and gas exploration, and patrolling within the Philippines' own EEZ. And in how it allows its own ships to fish there without Philippine government permission. The Arbitral Tribunal Award was a huge victory for the Philippines and deserves to be commemorated, not just by Filipinos, but by all who believe in fair and equal rules that apply to everyone, and that might should never make right.
Thank you very much for another interesting presentation, Colonel Raymond Powell. Before we proceed, may we call in again Colonel Ray Powell and Ambassador Mary Kay Carlson for a quick photo opportunity with Strat-based President Dindo Manhirt. Okay. Now, our next speaker is Dr. Evan Laxmana. Currently, he is a senior fellow for Southeast Asia Military Modernization at the Asia Office of the International Institute for Strategic Studies in Singapore. He will be joining us virtually today, all the way from London, to talk about strategizing the Philippine military capabilities in the Indo-Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for Dr. Evan Laxmana.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, let me say thank you to Dindo and to Strat-based for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts on the Philippines military strategy moving forward. Second, let me say that the bulk of my short presentation largely revolve around on what I think are some of the potential lessons from Indonesia's own effort to sort of transition from confronting internal security threats to external security, something that the Philippines have been trying to do over the past year. And so these are largely kind of key focus areas and levels and pillars to what I consider to be the need to have a solid framework in place for defense transformation beyond simply modernization or reform, with the hope, of course, that some of the lessons drawn from Indonesia's own experience can be useful for the Philippines defense establishment as they consider steps and policies moving forward. So there are four, I think, key issues or key policy buckets, if you will, that I think are relevant for Philippines and military strategy and DFP moving forward at the strategic level, at the organizational level, at the operational level, and of course, at the technological level. At the strategic level, I think it is certainly noteworthy that the direction from the top in terms of shifting from internal security operations to external security is widely notable. And of course, the relationship with the United States and the alliance management moving forward would be central to that aspect. So I think a lot of the basic features on the strategic level, I think, have been put in place. And certainly the development of non-ASEAN options, whether it's about the relationship with the Philippines have with Japan or with Australia, is certainly a step in the right direction. Of course, that means for the rest of Southeast Asia, it is an issue of Philippines also kind of boosting its ASEAN options. And this is where I think the ASEAN-China Code of Conduct process remains in play. Of course, we can debate about the extent of its utility, given what we see over the past few years of China's maritime behavior in the West Philippine Sea. But I feel like at the strategic level, the key direction is very much clear on the challenges moving forward. What I think is a bit more requiring more homework and more time to work out is at the organizational, operational, and technological level. At the organizational level, I think certainly the focus on the Air Force and the Navy moving forward is crucial, and that's been set in policy over the past year for the Philippines. But of course, the challenge is more than just about arms procurement. We discuss a lot about the Horizon procurement plans and modernization plans. But of course, when we talk about organizational challenges, and this is the same with Indonesia, the change required and the reform required beyond technology is much more difficult. And so this is where I think we need to start thinking of a different benchmark for organizational transformation beyond arms procurement for the Air Force and the Navy, and look at issues like order of battle, the positions of key officers within key decision making. Is it still dominated, for example, by the Army? Issues that relates to doctrinal development, education and training programs, exercises. These are all key organizational issues and challenges that I think, in the case of Indonesia, for sure, has not been properly addressed. And it will be unfortunate if Philippines, given this great momentum right now, to also not address some of these key basic nuts and bolts of the organizational side of things. Certainly, I think what the Philippines have been trying to do with small unit experiments such as the Coastal Defense Regiment, MARU, and others is certainly noteworthy as they experiment and learn new technology, as we've seen in some of the Balikatan exercises and others, some of new operational concepts. So these small unit changes and experiments that the Philippines have been doing is certainly a step in the right direction. The challenge moving forward is how do we upscale those small unit experiments to something much wider across the AFP establishment rather than just a few single units or armed service. And of course, at a much deeper level, issues of personnel management, whether it's about pension reform or promotion career policies, these are all things that Indonesia continues to struggle with. And when I was in the Philippines a few weeks ago, I noticed that some of those challenges are also still something that the Philippines are struggling with. And in fact, I was told by one of my interlocutors in Manila that as far as the modernization plan is concerned, the personnel side of things is probably the least developed and systematically addressed. So I think in that sense, it's certainly a noteworthy that personnel management, I think, should be at the heart of organizational transformation for the Philippines. And this is something that Indonesia itself is still struggling with. The third group of issues is much more on the operational side of things. And we see this, I think, certainly that the Philippines have been trying to kind of operationalize new concept of operations in various exercises with the US. There's been more discussions about doctrinal development and maybe even future wargaming. And I think these are all trends in the right direction. The next step is, of course, figuring out issues pertaining to operational readiness beyond its exercises with the US partners and allies, and whether or not domestic training that the AFP have been developing in the future in terms of the scenario-based exercises, I think will be much crucial, because I think some of the challenges that the Philippines have is quite similar with Indonesia, in that some of the defense planning assessment are still based on kind of a traditional, if not archaic, capability-based assessment rather than scenario-based assessment. And I think this creates more challenges in the future. And of course, the issue when it comes to operational level is certainly the management of the internal security space, and whether or not the Philippines can actually transition away from internal security may also have to depend on the readiness of the Philippine National Police to take over some of these challenges. And in the case of Indonesia, about 15 years ago, that was a huge challenge, because Indonesia was also confronted with various internal security challenges at the time. But in Indonesia, we made it a point to designate the police and improve the capability of the police to handle some of these challenges. Of course, in reality, the relationship between the police and the military in Indonesia has always been awkward and full of challenges, even until today. But the step has to be made that the police should be much more improved to be able to take on some of the internal security challenges. But of course, internal security challenges in the Philippines, as in Indonesia, is much more complex than just insurgency groups or terrorist groups, because it talks about a much more wider set of problems with regards to economic development, social issues, and others. But I think in terms of operational set of challenges, when we think of defense transformation processes, without a way to transition away from to sort of shift away some of these internal security tasks and challenges away from the military or the AFP, it will be very hard to develop a much more scenario-based and a much more focused systematic force to deal with external security challenges. And lastly, I just want to touch on the technological side of force modernization or defense transformation, which is, of course, we've heard how much when it comes to the Horizon Modernization Plan, for example, at the Shangri-La Dialogue last month at the beginning of June, I heard General Santino talks about how the current revision of the current list of Horizon 3 is currently underway. We also heard publicly from the AFP spokesperson, I think last week or a few days ago, how only about 36% of the 150 plus projects of the Horizon have been completed, which means there's a significant amount of projects remain uncompleted for the Horizon. So I think this is where, of course, resources are crucial in that respects, but there's a much more deeper and much more difficult, I think, set of questions about how to cut costs. In the Indonesian case, we have a similar problem, which is we never have enough space at the fiscal level to procure expensive weaponry, and we are still currently having difficult conversation how to cut costs from a personnel level, because just like in Indonesia, I think Philippines about 50 to 60%, in some years maybe even 70% of its costs remains focused on personnel and regular expenditure rather than capital outlay or defense R&D and others. So shifting the fiscal space discussion is much more deeper and much more complicated. In Indonesia's case, for example, there are kind of private, difficult conversations about whether or not we should cut the number of personnel, particularly from the army, that continues to take on a large chunk of the resources moving forward. I think a second set of issues for the AFP that's also relevant based on Indonesia's experience is the need to replace aging equipment, but do it in a way that considers interoperability. Now, certainly with Indonesia, it's much more difficult because Indonesia has about 30 plus foreign suppliers, while the Philippines is about 15 to 20 plus. And so in that sense, there's less of a problem. But long-term modernization plan isn't just about off-the-shelf procurement, but also about maintenance, repair, training, interoperability. And these are issues that I think is relevant because Philippines right now is considering various options from Europe. We heard, for example, from Italy, from France, from Japan, India, and others. And without an integrated blueprint that considers these various issues of interoperability, maintenance, training, and others, simply diversifying supplier of new weaponry without considering these long-term issues, I think will be challenging. And this is the problem with Indonesia, precisely because we did not think of these much more difficult nuts and bolts issues that we're stuck with various platforms that cannot work with one another. And so let me end my talk there with kind of perhaps a lessons learned from Indonesia, what not to do when we were considering our defense transformation process, which is number one, defense transformation is much more deeper and broader than simply arms procurement. So when we focus our attention only on arms modernization without considering a wider set of force capability development from education to personnel to technology to structures to doctrine, and none of those force modernization efforts that's centered on tech alone will be sustainable, and it certainly won't be very much useful in the face of growing challenges and strategic flux around the region. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Evan Laxmana. So to stay on time, we will no longer be having a coffee break. But if you do want to have coffee, please feel free to get a cup from our coffee nook outside. So, and now we will move on to the second half of our afternoon session. All right, so the recognition of and adherence to a rules-based international order ensures the maintenance of peace and security in the Indo-Pacific, as what our speakers have been telling us all day. In the case of the West Philippine Sea, the 2016 arbitral victory of the Philippines is further strengthened by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Our win is anchored in international law and must therefore be acknowledged by all states, even China, as a collective responsibility. To talk more extensively on the basis of the arbitral award, asserting Philippine sovereign rights and jurisdiction in the West Philippine Sea, please join me in welcoming Justice Antonio Carpio, former Senior Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the Philippines.
Good afternoon. We mark today the 7th anniversary of the Arbitral Award. We also remember Secretary de Rosario, who against all odds initiated and pursued the Arbitral Award. And that is his greatest legacy to all of us today. My task is to restate to you the core rulings of the Arbitral Award, and I'm supposed to do this in 10 minutes. That means I have to compress 479 pages of the Arbitral Award. First, of course, is the ruling that China's 9-dash line has no legal effect in determining maritime zones under UNCLOS. Now, to do justice to the enormity of this ruling, let me quote the precise words of the Arbitral Tribunal in striking down China's 9-dash line. And I quote the tribunal. The tribunal declares that, as between the Philippines and China, China claims to historic rights or other sovereign rights or jurisdiction with respect to the maritime areas of the South China Sea encompassed by the relevant part of the nine-dash line are contrary to the convention and without lawful effect to the extent that they exceed the geographic and substantive limits of China's maritime entitlements under the convention, and further declares that the convention superseded any historic rights or other sovereign rights or jurisdiction in excess of the limits imposed therein, end of quote. This resounding ruling will echo throughout history amidst the whispering waves of the South China Sea. Maritime zones under UNCLOS, like the Exclusive Economic Zone or EEZ of the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea, are determined solely by the provisions of UNCLOS. 12 nautical miles for the territorial sea and 200 nautical miles for the EEZ, both measured from baselines determined in accordance with UNCLOS, and 150 nautical miles from the extended continental shelf measured from the outer limits of the EEZ. Under UNCLOS, a coastal state can only claim maritime zones as expressly allowed under UNCLOS. To ensure peace and stability in the seas of our planet, UNCLOS extinguished all historic rights, all historic claims beyond the territorial sea, including China's nine-dash line, which is actually not historic, it's fictional. China's nine-dash line is not measured from the baselines of China as determined under UNCLOS. China's nine-dash line claims waters and resources beyond what UNCLOS allows. Thus, China's alleged historic claim to maritime zones under its nine-dash line has no basis whatsoever under UNCLOS. In short, the arbitral award or the arbitral tribunal ruled that China can only claim maritime zones expressly allowed under UNCLOS, and consequently, China's nine-dash line cannot serve as legal basis to claim any of the waters or resources of the South China Sea. Second, the arbitral tribunal ruled that the 46-hectare Ituaba, the largest island in the Spratlys, is not capable of human habitation. Under UNCLOS, an island must be capable of human habitation based on its own natural resources to generate a 200 nautical mile EEZ. Thus, the rest of the high tide features in the Spratlys, which are all much smaller than Ituaba, do not also generate EEZs, but only 12 nautical mile territorial seas, just like Ituaba. This means that there are no overlapping EEZs between Palawan and any of the geologic features in the Spratlys. Had there been an overlapping EEZ, the arbitral dispute and would have dismissed the case outright, at least for the area of the coast of Palawan. China had opted out of compulsory arbitration in 2006 in case of overlapping maritime zones requiring sea boundary delimitation. This specific opt-out clause is allowed under UNCLOS. So the defense of China that there are overlapping EEZs in the West Philippine Sea was debunked by the arbitral tribunal. This is the first case where an international tribunal explained what constitutes a habitable island that can generate a 200 nautical mile EEZ. Because of this ruling, many coastal states can no longer claim 200 nautical mile EEZs for their tiny islands that do not meet the criteria of a habitable island. All these tiny or uninhabitable islands are entitled only to 12 nautical mile territorial seas. In effect, the ruling has expanded considerably the high seas in our planet. In the high seas, there is freedom of fishing for all states of the world, coastal or landlocked. Since China has the largest fishing fleet in the world, China has actually gained more fishing grounds than it has lost under the arbitral award. Now, putting together the ruling that China's nine-dash line cannot serve as legal basis to claim any of the waters or resources of the South China Sea, as well as the ruling that none of the high tide features in the Spratlys generate an EEZ, we come to the inescapable conclusion that the Philippines has a 200 nautical mile EEZ in the West Philippine Sea, unimpaired by China's 9-dash line. However, excluded from this Philippine exclusive economic zone are the 12 nautical mile territorial seas of the high tide features in the Spratlys, as well as in Scarborough Shoal. The reason for this exclusion is that the EEZ begins from the outer limit of the 12 nautical mile territorial sea. In short, under the Arbitral Award, the Philippines has in the West Philippine Sea a full 200 nautical mile EEZ, a maritime area larger than the total land area of the Philippines. There are, however, pockets of territorial seas within the West Philippine Sea. Third, the Arbitral Tribunal ruled that the Spratlys is not an archipelago because it does not satisfy the water-to-land ratio, ranging from 1:1 to 9:1 water-to-land ratio required for archipelagos under UNCLOS. Thus, archipelagic baselines cannot be drawn to connect the geologic features in the Spratlys. The Arbitral Tribunal also ruled that the Spratlys are too far from the main coast of Palawan to apply the straight baselines under UNCLOS applicable to fringing islands along the coast. Thus, the only normal baselines that can be used in the Spratlys, the only baselines that can be used in the Spratlys are the normal baselines under UNCLOS, which means that the baselines will be drawn from the low water mark along the coast of each high tide feature. China drew highly questionable straight baselines around the paracels. But with this ruling, all claimant states, including China, are forewarned that straight baselines cannot be drawn around the Spratlys. We were fearful that China might draw straight baselines around the Spratlys in the same way that it drew straight baselines around the paracels. Of course, the U.S., with its freedom of navigation, entered the waters of the paracels because, according to the U.S., the U.S. is correct, the paracels are not entitled to straight baselines. They are only entitled to normal baselines, and you can determine the territorial sea from the low water mark of each baseline of the geologic feature. Under Republic Act 9522 enacted in 2009, the Philippines adopted the normal baselines for the features we claim in the Spratlys and Scarborough Shoal. In effect, the ruling of the Arbitral Tribunal, issued 3 years after the enactment of Republic Act 9522, affirmed the correctness of the normal baselines that we adopted earlier under Republic Act 9522. Fourth, the Arbitral Award made specific rulings on the status of geologic features in the Spratlys and Scarborough Shoal. The Arbitral Tribunal in the Arbitral Award ruled that Reed Bank is fully submerged and situated within the EEZ of the Philippines. Consequently, the Philippines has exclusive right to exploit the natural resources like oil and gas in Reed Bank. This ruling is important for it assures service contractors who extract the gas in Reed Bank that the Philippines, under international law, owns the gas in Reed Bank and has the right, legal right, to issue those service contracts. The Arbitral Tribunal also ruled that Mischief Reef is a low tide feature which generates no maritime zones of its own. Mischief Reef is part of the EEZ of the Philippines, and only the Philippines can erect structures or artificial islands on Mischief Reef. Consequently, the 560-hectare artificial island that China reclaimed on Mischief Reef to host its huge air and naval base is under UNCLOS an illegal construction. The Arbitral Tribunal further ruled that Subi Reef, which China reclaimed to host another huge air and naval base, is a low tide feature just 12 nautical miles outside of Pag-asa Island. Absent any geologic feature between Subi Reef and Pag-asa Island, Subi Reef would form part of the EEZ of the Philippines. However, the Arbitral Tribunal noted that about 1.5 nautical miles from Pag-asa Island is Sandy Cay, which in turn is within 12 nautical miles from Subi Reef. Sandy Cay is a high tide elevation part of the year, but either low tide or completely submerged the rest of the year. It's a disappearing island. Despite this, the Arbitral Tribunal ruled that Sandy Cay is a high tide feature, which means that Subi Reef is within the territorial sea of Sandy Cay. Nevertheless, the Arbitral Tribunal noted that, and I quote, even without a high tide feature in the location of Sandy Cay, end of quote, considering that Sandy Cay disappears part of the year, there is another low tide feature within the territorial sea of Pag-asa Island, and Subi Reef is within 12 nautical miles from this low tide feature. Under UNCLOS, such low tide feature can be the base point from which the 12 nautical mile territorial sea of Pag-asa is measured, making Subi Reef part of the territorial sea of Pag-asa Island. Thus, the Arbitral Tribunal concluded, and I quote the Arbitral Tribunal, accordingly, the significance of Sandy Cay for the status of Subi Reef is minimal, end of quote. Well, not anymore. After China seized Sandy Cay in 2017 during the Duterte administration, now China is claiming that Subi Reef is part of the territorial sea of Sandy Cay, with China surrounded with maritime militia vessels 24 hours a day, in the same way that China surrounded Scarborough Shoal with its maritime militia vessels since 2012. If China succeeds in permanently seizing Sandy Cay, then the Philippines will lose to China at least a third of the territorial sea of Pag-asa Island, including Subi Reef. So this is a developing story, and we have to monitor what China is doing in Sandy Cay, because with sea level rise, by the end of the century, sea level rise will be 1 to 2 meters. This will completely submerge Sandy Cay. So what I've been hearing is that the Chinese have been pouring sand into Sandy Cay to keep it above water at high tide. So we have to document this, because this will be an issue in the Arbitral Tribunal, whether it is a naturally formed island. If with technology China added sand there, then that is not naturally formed, so it will have no territorial sea. The Arbitral Tribunal, moreover, ruled that Ayungin Shoal, also known as Second Thomas Shoal, is a low-tide feature forming part of the Philippine EEZ in the West Philippine Sea. Ayungin Shoal is where the BRP Sierra Madre is beached, manned by a dozen brave Philippine Marines. Only the Philippines can erect a structure or artificial island on Ayungin Shoal, since under UNCLOS, the coastal state has exclusive right to erect structures or artificial islands within its EEZ. So only the Philippines can put up any structure or artificial island in our EEZ in the West Philippine Sea. And our EEZ in the West Philippine Sea is larger than the total land area of the Philippines. The Arbitral Tribunal further ruled that the following geologic features in the Spratlys are high tide elevations entitled to their own territorial seas: Gavin Reef North, Makinon Reef, Johnson Reef, Quarteron Reef, and Fiery Cross Reef. On the other hand, the Arbitral Tribunal ruled that Gavin Reef South and Huge Reef in the Spratlys are low tide elevations not entitled to any territorial sea. On the northern side of the West Philippine Sea, the Arbitral Tribunal ruled that Scarborough Shoal is a high tide feature, but incapable of human habitation and thus entitled only to a 12 nautical mile territorial sea. China has been claiming that Scarborough Shoal, which is the only high tide feature in its so-called Zhongsha Islands, is entitled to a 200 nautical mile EEZ. There's not a single blade of grass that grows on Scarborough Shoal, and China is claiming that it is habitable. This claim is, of course, without basis, and the Arbitral Tribunal so ruled. The Arbitral Tribunal further ruled that the territorial sea of Scarborough Shoal is the traditional fishing ground common to Filipino, Chinese, and Vietnamese fishermen who have all equal fishing rights in the territorial sea of Scarborough Shoal. Now, as UNCLOS governs only maritime issues, the Arbitral Tribunal did not rule on what state has sovereignty over the high tide features in the Spratlys and Scarborough Shoal. The Arbitral Tribunal only ruled on the maritime issues, whether a geologic feature is high tide, entitled to its own territorial sea, or low tide, not entitled to a territorial sea, and whether a geologic feature is just a rock, or also capable of human habitation based on its own natural resources, and therefore entitled to 200 nautical mile EEZ. Fifth and lastly, the Arbitral Tribunal ruled that China's, and I quote, land reclamation and construction of artificial islands, installations, and structures has caused severe, irreparable harm to the coral reef ecosystem in the Spratlys, end of quote. This is a searing indictment of China's destructive reclamations in the Spratlys. This is also the first time under UNCLOS that an international tribunal ruled on the obligation of coastal states to preserve and protect the marine environment. China's destruction of the marine environment in the Spratlys is ironic. With the largest fishing fleet in the world, China has been taking more than 50% of the annual fish catch in the South China Sea. The South China Sea accounts for 12% of the world's total fish catch, while occupying only a minuscule 2.5% of the ocean surface of the world. The South China Sea is very productive in fishery because of the Spratlys, a vast collection of atolls that serve as a breeding ground of fish. The fish that breed in the Spratlys form part of the vital food chain of the fish in the South China Sea. Without the fish that breed in the Spratlys, this food chain will break, and the fish stock in the entire South China Sea will collapse. So China, with its destructive reclamation in the Spratlys, has actually depleted severely the fish supply available to its own people, as well as to the peoples of other coastal states in the South China Sea. To end my remarks, I wish to stress the obvious. As long as China does not respect the EEZs of the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia in the South China Sea, China will never be a true friend of these countries. These countries are indisputably entitled to their own exclusive economic zones under international law. With the Arbitral Award, no state can ever
All right. Thank you. Is this working? Okay. Thank you very much, Justice Antonio Carpio. Right. All right. We are also pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Raul Pangalangan. He is a former judge at the International Criminal Court at The Hague, Netherlands, and is also a professor of law and the former dean at the University of the Philippines College of Law. He is also a trustee at the Strat-based ADR Institute. Joining us virtually today, ladies and gentlemen, let's all welcome Dr. Raul Pangalangan.
Before anything else, I join Justice Carpio in paying tribute to Secretary Albert del Rosario, who has left us with this legacy, which is our victory at the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague. I'd also like to do something that Justice Carpio could not have done. I recognize the work, the key and vital contributions of Justice Tony Carpio in making our case at The Hague. When the Philippines won the case, the official response of the Philippine government was actually funereal. We didn't bring out the champagne. There were no celebratory feasts. The response, I saw an interview of a ranking Philippine government official. He was asked, what can you say about your winning the case? And he said, we will study its consequences. And someone said, that is the statement of someone who lost the case. That is not the statement of someone who wins a case. And someone said to me at The Hague at that time, and he was, by the way, sympathetic to the Philippine case. He says, I am happy that you won, but how I wished you didn't win too resoundingly. And there was the unspoken fear that you don't poke a giant and expect no retribution in return. Well, no less than Philippine President Duterte has referred to the award as a mere scrap of paper. And that is a critique of international decisions that echoes across the board. It was actually made against my own former court, the International Criminal Court, which began its investigation of the extrajudicial killings in the Philippines, in the war on drugs. And the oft repeated question is, who will enforce the decision? If there is a warrant of arrest, who will carry out that arrest? Is there a global police empowered to do so? Which brings us then to my assigned topic, which is rule-based, a rule-based international legal order. And it is sad to note that it is largely misunderstood, not just in the Philippines, but in Asia as well. There is the apocryphal question asked by Joseph Stalin, scoffing at the Vatican. And he asked, why, he says, how many divisions does the Pope have? You can imagine the variations of that question being asked of many international law decisions. But the fact is, international law has endured. It was the cornerstone of the post-World War II legal order. And I can give you a concrete example. In a case that I handled at the ICC, the accused was actually captured by the U.S. Military. And the U.S. is not a party to the Rome Statute, and yet the U.S. cooperated with the court, surrendered the accused into the custody of the court, and we proceeded to try the accused. There is a very famous quotation in international law from Professor Louis Henkin, who said, almost all nations observe almost all principles of international law and almost all of their obligations almost all of the time. I think that captures the nature and the limits of the discipline. And actually, in local Philippine discourse, that quotation is actually seen not as strengthening the place of international law, but on the contrary, weakening it. And I think it is because domestically, we have an absolutist notion of the rules. When in fact, in actual practice, and not just in the Philippines, but in many other jurisdictions where the rule of law is well established, all these legal systems recognize a margin of appreciation in the interpretation of rules. They all recognize zones of gray in the enforcement of these rules, that they are not always black and white, and that there is a allowable discretion given to those in power. Which brings us then to the larger issue. In Asia, there is a certain ambivalence about international law. And it is often said that maybe it's because of the colonial experience in Asia, that these countries have an impulse to oppose foreign and international regulation. I actually don't agree. Well, especially for the Philippines, we have been independent for more than 100 years. I think after a century, I think we should stop blaming the colonizers for our problems. This excuse sounds hollow today. I think the resistance, not just in the Philippines, but in Asia, to international courts springs not from the fact that these are international, but rather from the fact that these are courts. It is the idea of rule-based governance, of rules, of neutral rules enforced by impartial arbiters, resulting in a decision binding upon the parties. That is the idea which is being resisted. And that is why, for me, if we want to promote the rule of law internationally, I think first we must promote it domestically. There are a few angles to this. The first is to promote it, well, we have to be consistent with the application of rules. And as we confront with the situation in Ukraine, the tu quoc argument is the frequent recourse of those who will violate it today, reminding their accusers that once upon a time they were the ones who were violating the rules. So it is important to be consistent in invoking and applying these rules. That is the first. The second is this: the advantage of invoking rules, especially the technical rules of the Law of the Sea Convention discussed by Justice Carpio, is that whereas perhaps for some countries the chief concern is national security, the rules actually provide a wider focus of interests. Just to name a few, there's the interest in mining in the continental shelf, which also leads to an interest in energy. There are, of course, interests in fisheries. There is an interest of the scientists in research, and quite telling, especially for the dispute between the Philippines and China, the environmental cost, the immense cost of the building of artificial islands. And that is an interest in which not just the Philippines, but the rest of the world has a claim. And therefore, a rules-based approach will frame the debate within a larger context, not just limited with the specific national security concerns that understandably dominates the minds of many. But by way of closing, the campaign for the universality of rules-based international regulation has to be sustained, and we have to develop deeper roots for a rule-based international legal order within the participant states, especially in Asia. It will be a long and lonely battle. Well, just like the story of our victory at the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague, I congratulate Stratbase for keeping the flame alive. Thank you and congratulations.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Raul Pangalangan. Okay. And our third speaker will be talking about protecting and upholding the freedom of navigation in Philippine waters. We are pleased to introduce Dr. J. Batong Bakal, Director of the University of the Philippines Institute for Maritime Affairs and the Law of the Sea, and also a professor at the University of the Philippines College of Law. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. J. Batong Bakal.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the ADRi Stratbase for inviting me again to speak, and I join everyone paying tribute to Secretary Del Rosario for having delivered this victory. But I would also like to pay tribute to President Aquino for having taken that very great decision, which I described at the time, skeptic that I am, as a leap of faith. And it turned out to be a leap of faith that truly became revelatory. Okay. The title of our talk is, of course, Protecting and Upholding the Freedom of Navigation in Philippine Waters. But given that I follow, like, what is this, about 7 ambassadors, a lot of academics, as well as 2 prestigious justices, I find it hard to say anything new. However, I will try. by, instead of talking, by showing illustrations. I gather na malaki daw ang kita ngayon sa mga logo. Okay. So, next slide, please. We have been talking about Philippine waters, and to just give everyone a clear view of what they look like now under UNCLOS, I present you with this map. It's unofficial, of course, but it illustrates to us the principles of UNCLOS, the maritime zones, the configuration of maritime zones that it describes, and inherently the kinds of rights and entitlements that they represent. And you will notice essentially that this configuration of maritime zones covers a much wider area than we claimed before under Treaty of Paris lines. Now, this configuration of maritime zones, however, with all of its rights and entitlements, most people do not realize are also very busy waters. Next slide. And this is where the Philippines basically connects with the international community. These lines that you see there represent the routes of maritime trade for an entire year, 2022. And they represent the interests not only of the Philippines, but also of the international community converging in Philippine waters. And next slide, we also have to consider that this is linked integrally with the greater region, Southeast Asia, the rest of the Indo-Pacific, and eventually the world. Our position and our waters are very strategically located, as already mentioned repeatedly several times this morning. And you see how strategic it is by its position vis-a-vis these maritime trade links. And our location as a country also happens to be very close to the potential flashpoints of today. We've heard mention of the geopolitical competition that has been sharpening. And these flashpoints around us are the key areas where this geopolitical competition might actually erupt. So one click, please. Another, and another. So you have various sea areas next to, above, and close to the Philippines, representing the key points where this competition is really intensifying. And of course, our concern throughout the day has always been the one closest to us in the South China Sea. And these areas of interest, shall we say, these flashpoints, together with our waters, form part of a larger whole, again, one click, which is the waters of Southeast Asia. And so you see the connection between our interests, the region's interests, as well as the rest of the world. And protecting the freedom of navigation through Philippine waters, therefore, also has a very clear and direct impact to protecting freedom of navigation in the waters all around us. Next slide. Now, the thing is, when it comes to the South China Sea, within which we have the West Philippine Sea, that area also is like a fulcrum for the entire Indo-Pacific. You have here within our area the key to sea power. And sea power in Mahanian terms basically shows you the strategic location of the disputed islands, which I've divided in three sectors here. You have the Paracels, Scarborough, and the Spratlys. And of course, our interests lie with two out of these three major island groups. And they provide basically the ability to deny the use of the seas or to control the use of seas, depending on who is actually able to set up in these locations, and from there, project maritime power. Around these strategic locations also lie the Southeast Asian straits, and the water is vital to maintaining regional and global access, as I showed you earlier. So by controlling this area, you can actually control the rest of the maritime traffic around our region. So next slide. The thing is, it's not just that. We also have to contend with our own interests being located within this complex web of international interests. Here, what I've done is illustrate basically how our interests are protected by the existing rules-based order. At the core, you have sovereignty. Sorry, apparently the Y was claimed by somebody else. You have sovereignty and sovereign rights, land, waters, all of it intertwined and protected normally by the state, using its own national laws and rules. Around that of course, all the policies and the actions that are undertaken for national defense to maintain the integrity of that sovereignty and sovereign rights. And that ability to exercise national defense, of course, takes place, can be exercised in times of armed conflict, but in times of peace, that may not be as necessary because what then becomes primary is to maintain regional stability and peace and order. And so that's why we have agreed to a system of international law that governs the exercises of jurisdiction and what we call civilian security or domestic law enforcement. The system of international law tries to enable states to carry them out in a peaceful way by regulating the rights, entitlements, duties, and obligations of states between us. That is one of the principal functions of UNCLOS, in fact, to govern the relations between states so that they do not need to use only to military force, but can actually relate each other peacefully through this agreement of the limits of their powers as well as what is right and wrong in the exercise of their rights and the pursuit as well of their interests. And beyond that, this system of international law basically also provides the terms of access, the common rights and freedoms, and jurisdictions at sea. No? So you see how UNCLOS tries to essentially protect the rights of states, their entitlements, and in the sea in order that they will be able to protect their own national interests, sovereignty, and sovereign rights. Now, arrayed, one click. Okay. When we say the rules-based order and international law, which again have been mentioned repeatedly this morning, what we're talking about is a system, a nested system of rules. No? One click. Which is embedded in various arrangements. Everything from domestic law at the bottom, occupation, development, national foreign policy, all of which are intended to protect sovereignty and sovereign rights, to various levels of agreements, bilateral, such as strategic partnerships, military alliances, even your own armed forces modernization, bilateral regional cooperation arrangements, as well as multilateral conventions. So each level in this system of rules and agreements basically aims to protect this nested system that you see in the middle. Now, within that rules-based order, that array of rules, you can identify certain areas, so one click, and another one, no, which are clearly meant to defend particular aspects of this system. So like UNCLOS and other international law, multilateral conventions, are intended to establish or to protect and maintain that common system, that common framework within which all of these other arrangements can be carried out. And bilateral and regional cooperation arrangements basically mediate between the multilateral, the global conventions, and your national laws and policies. Now, one click. So this is the most important aspect when we talk about the rules-based order and international law and what it is that we're trying to protect. Because against this, then, one click, you have China and what it has been doing in the past couple of decades, especially through, which have become especially more, have become sharper and clearer in the last years since we decided to confront China with its claims in the South China Sea. Another click. So you have, you have everything from its exceptionalism in international law, claiming rights that are unique to it, such as the so-called historic rights, which are actually fictional. The exercise of de facto civilian administration and control, which is what it is doing by imposing itself, its Coast Guard, and its laws as close to the Philippines as 50 to 60 nautical miles away from Pangasinan, for example. And underneath it all, the expansion of its military, law enforcement, and paramilitary forces at sea, all of it intended as extensions of its occupation, development, and national foreign policy, its national interests. But all of these various aspects of what it's doing are, one click, directed against exactly the rules-based international order that we see, that we established, that, and under which our country now exists. And that is why it is important for us, no, to defend the international law and this rules-based order against this type of attack, shall we say. It's not attacking against an armed attack, but essentially it are deliberate moves to undermine that system from which we benefit. Okay. Next slide. So you bring that back to this image of the region and what is happening, and you can see why protecting and defending Philippine waters and the West Philippine Sea has huge implications to the rest of the region because it is also protecting what goes on in the rest of the region, because it is the same framework that has allowed all of these other states, especially after World War II, when they emerged as independent countries, no, after colonialism, it is what has allowed them to emerge and thrive. And one more click. And when you think of the international community, no, and the global community, you cannot just think of the map of the world and the countries and the continents there. You must also include the links, that makes them a community, particularly the maritime trade links that enable international trade, that is the lifeblood of the international community. And see that lifeblood linking nations across the world. And all of that is made possible by the current system of international law, UNCLOS, and all of these things that we describe as the rules-based international order. Cut one part of that link, one click, such as what we have there in the South China Sea, and you basically sunder the entire international system. And that is what we are trying to protect. It's not just our own interests, it's also the interests of the region, the Indo-Pacific, and the world. And so I just conclude that is why, one slide, next slide please. That is why we need to defend the West Philippine Sea, because by defending the West Philippine Sea, we are essentially defending the world. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. J. Batongbakal. I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions for our speakers today. So we will now proceed to our open forum. All right. Okay. And to moderate the discussion, may we call on Mr. Richard Haydarian, a non-resident fellow at the Strat-based ADR Institute and a senior lecturer at the University of the Philippines Asian Center. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Richard Haydarian.
Thank you very much again for that. I'm just a moderator. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk too much. This year really feels different. I've been an alumnus of this arbitration anniversary for the past more than half a decade, but I can say that this year the energy is very different. I would say it's not only about the arbitration victory, but also a sense of vindication among a lot of us who have been very much invested in making sure that we defend our sovereign rights. We're going to head to our forum very shortly with a couple of questions and all, but let me just make a few very short remarks. I think there are three things to keep in mind. The first thing is, this is not only about the effort of one person or one organization or one government. This has been really a collective resistance by all of us. Folks, Dindo has done a fantastic job writing for the Philippine Daily Inquirer, organizing these events, energetically mobilizing people who care for the country. Of course, Justice Carpio, our colleagues like Dr. Rene de Castro, a lot of leading experts and a lot of patriots in the Philippines have done really a fantastic job. Because let's just be honest, the past 6 years or so was not easy for people who cared about the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea. There were death threats, there were a lot of gaslighting. You would be accused of being a warmonger by no less than the former president. If you try to assert the Philippine Arbitration Award, he would say that if you do that, there will be war with China. It was really difficult. And then if not for the camaraderie, I don't think we would have been able to hold the line together. So I think just to disabuse people of some misconception, it was not just one journalist or one organization who held the ground. All of us held the ground. It was a job of 1,000 people, and it was 1,000 lashes that we had to resist throughout those years. So I really feel the sense of vindication in the room, that after 6 years of very difficult and torturous moment, here we are. And I think things are moving in the right direction, which brings me to the second point, revival. So it has not been only a question of collective resistance, but also revival. Revival of alliance between us and the United States. I mean, this is a long enduring alliance. Things have been quite difficult and challenging over the years. But now, you could quite confidently say that the Philippines is perhaps emerging as one of the new star allies of the United States after a few years of conversation back and forth. And also here in the Philippines, more and more of us are beginning to appreciate what our alliance with the United States is bringing to the table, especially as we push ahead with the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement and a whole host of initiatives that are going to make sure that Philippines and US alliance is more comprehensive, more deep, and more robust than ever, including on the economic front. So we're very carefully also watching the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the special trade mission that the Biden administration is going to send to the Philippines. And the last thing I want to say is that, as a scholar of international relations, as someone who's written extensively on Philippine foreign policy over the past decade or so, I'm proud to say that I feel there's a revolution in Philippine foreign policy, including in our outlook in terms of foreign policy. As important as our alliance with the United States is, as consequential as our bilateral relationship with China has been and is going to be, I think there's more appreciation of the Philippines' new place of pride in the international community. I think we feel that we're not just another small power, but a middle power in its own right. And we can reach out to more and more countries. We have ambassadors from Australia, from Germany, from Britain. And we feel that we're dealing with all of these powers, middle powers, on terms that is mutually beneficial, unlike any kind of relationship that we have in the past. So, and this does not have to be exclusive. It doesn't have to be an either or case. We can maintain a good and stable relationship with China as long as it's something that protects our interests. We're going to maintain a robust alliance with the United States, but that should never stop us from pursuing a whole network of alliances and partnerships all around the world. So I also sense this, new outlook, this revolutionary outlook in Philippine foreign policy, which I think we should have had a long time ago. But I think the time has arrived, and I feel very proud as a Filipino whenever we're in international events, because I know that everyone wants to deal with us, because everyone is appreciating that we have been discovering and rediscovering our strategic autonomy. So I also had to do my own moral crusade kind of speech. I think I was very inspired by the intervention by our colleagues earlier. So on that note, let's move forward with the open forum. Now, obviously, there are certain questions that our audience have had. I'm going to call out folks shortly, but just some basic questions. So there's some specific questions to some of the speakers, but there are also some general questions. Yes, yes, may I invite the speakers on the stage? I hope I didn't overtalk you guys. Dr. Batang Bakal, yes. Okay. Straight. And then the rest are still with us, right? Online. Yeah, I think it's doing some interview. Yeah, okay, so maybe I can start with the other folks while Justice Scorpio and all around. Okay. I think the others are still working on their coffee. Okay, maybe I'll start with the first more specific questions as other comes in. For Colonel Powell, okay, fantastic. Okay, maybe these are the more individual questions you can answer later on. But just for Colonel Powell, what role does public opinion play in West Philippine Sea? Does public opinion shape the government's narrative and actions with regards to the West Philippine Sea? I mean, what does the study show you? And then for Dr. Laksamana, I think he's still joining us, our good friend. Is Dr. Laksamana still with us? Well, the question to him was more operationally, how can the private sector contribute to the Philippines' military modernization? Can we have a kind of a PPP also version for that front if Dr. Laksamana is still with us? And then more general question, going back to what we're talking about a while ago, today marks of course, the 7th anniversary of the Arbitral Award. How do you feel about that? Are we moving in the right direction? Have we lost ground? Can we make up for lost ground? Is there enough diplomatic momentum and capital for us to make sure we can mobilize international support? Or Justice Scorpio, you have mentioned this, perhaps we have already been successfully mobilizing international support to better protect our interests. Maybe Justice Scorpio first, and then the individual question.
Well, thank you. Well, we have definitely lost ground during the Duterte administration. Those are 6 years that we slept, that the government slept on the Arbitral Award. But I think we have regained the momentum, and we just have to do it. I mean, we're getting more support now. You have the G7, you have India, and the other countries will follow, I understand. So I think we are getting the support now because we are showing that we are asserting our sovereign rights. If we don't assert our sovereign rights, the other countries will not protect us. They said, why will we go in front of you? You assert your rights and we will support you. We cannot assert it for you. I think, yes, we have lost time, but we cannot cry over that. We just have to proceed and start again where we left off.
But Justice Carpet, how do you feel about the fact that, of course, you have more and more freedom of navigation operation by the Americans? You have more patrols, open access patrols by other countries. Do you think that's kind of a partial implementation of the arbitral award in a sense?
Yes,
or at least consistent with that?
whenever the US and its allies sail in the West Philippine Sea, they are telling China and the rest of the world, we can sail here under freedom of navigation and overflight because this is the EEZ of a coastal state. Now, in the West Philippine Sea, there is only one coastal state, the Philippines. And so, in fact, the US and its allies are enforcing the arbitral award for us. We should be welcoming the US. We should, in fact, join them because that's the significance. Can you just imagine if today the US will withdraw, the allies of the US will withdraw, they will not enter the South China Sea anymore. What will happen? China will now make the Nine Dash Line as its national boundary. You will lose immediately the West Philippine Sea. So just imagine that if the US and its allies will withdraw from the South China Sea today, then it's game over.
Just as you have pushed for the Philippines to take its case to the United Nations General Assembly, do you think there should be follow-up legal and diplomatic measures to catch up for the lost time and at the same time to regain momentum?
Yes, Ukraine did not go to the Security Council when Russia invaded Ukraine because, of course, there's a veto power. Russia has a veto power. China can also veto it. So Ukraine went to the General Assembly, and the General Assembly overwhelmingly condemned Russia for the invasion. What Russia is doing in Ukraine by kinetic force, by war, China is doing by gray zone tactics. The objective is the same, to overturn the international legal order, to seize territory and maritime zones by intimidation. That's the strategy of China. We will not fire a single shot, but we will get all your islands in the West Philippine Sea, your maritime zones, by intimidation, because we have these huge air and naval bases. We have huge warships that patrol daily in the West Philippine Sea. So by intimidation, China wants to grab our territories, maritime zones. Russia by physical force. But it's the same. It's all in violation of the UN Charter because the UN Charter says you cannot settle a dispute by force or threat of force, by use of force or threat of force. Russia is using force in Ukraine. China is using threat of force in the West Philippines. So these two countries are out to reverse the international legal order. What Secretary de Rosario says is they are trying to bring back the rule of might is right. But if we do that, we go to the period just before the 1945 Charter, UN Charter, when war was a legitimate means of annexing territory. And if we go back to that order, we will have perpetual wars and even world wars, and the Third World War will be the last war. So we have to stop this. This is not only the battle of the Philippines. This is not the battle of Ukraine. The Europeans see this correctly. It's a battle for the world order. And if might is right rules, then you need vast amounts of nuclear arms. And Russia has that. But we cannot allow that. Thank you.
Dr. Batambakal, you have also written extensively on the fisheries aspect, the damage that has been done to our ecology. Because the reason I'm saying this is because some people are making an argument that, well, the 30 years were quite difficult, but it was a wake-up call. It was the catalyst. At least now we have realized what we need, etc. But some people would say, I mean, Justice Carpio has already talked about the lost ground on the arbitration award, but other people say there are actually a lot of lost ground or lost resources in the West Philippine Sea. Can you shed light on that, and what you also feel should be the next way forward to reinforce and bolster the arbitration?
We lost a lot. We lost time, 6 years instead of this, what's going on right now, having the international community mobilize around us to help us assert our rights. This should have happened 2016.
2016, yeah.
And imagine if that had happened 2016, what would have happened at least to say all these Chinese incursions into the West Philippine Sea, the fishing that went on, the clam digging, the reclamation, no, of those islands, no, the construction of facilities on those islands, installation of weapons like missiles, surveillance equipment, sensors, radars, etc., jamming equipment. All of that could at the very least have been slowed down. But instead, they were able to finish it quickly by 2018. Within 2 years, they were already in place. So we lost the time. We lost the opportunities, like political opportunities, particularly chairmanship of the ASEAN being the one that comes to mind, and other meetings that we organized during that time, which we could have used to heighten, to elevate our profile, and also leverage our positions at the time in order to move things along even further. Resources, we've lost them because 6 years of fishing, perhaps maybe 4 years, depending on, based on the data, no, at least 4 years worth of maximum overexploitation.
Yeah.
That's why our fishermen now in Zambales, Pangasinan are complaining, especially this year, walang huli, literally. They're coming home without catch, and they're having to subsist on support from NGOs and other entities because they literally cannot fish enough to survive. Our fishing industry that operates in the West Philippine Sea is now on the brink because they're not even finding it profitable to venture out there anymore because they're not even able to shelter in times of inclement weather like this in order to continue fishing operations. So it's become even unprofitable to simply venture out there. So we're losing as well access to resources. The petroleum sector, we've lost what, 6 years, more than 6 years of opportunity, of exploration opportunity, of finding some way to ensure energy security, especially since Malampaya is about to run out in a couple
And
of
dozens
years.
of our fishermen almost died, right?
Yeah.
Almost drowned, not
So
far away from the
we've-
area. Yeah.
Definitely, we've lost a lot. But now look at the sun. It's like suddenly a gate has been opened, and all these countries are now very strongly supporting our position because finally we are speaking out quite clearly. Finally, our people, especially Coast Guard, Navy, etc., are acting and showing that they are trying to protect our people out at sea. This should have happened 2016, no? And if we had started then, who knows where we would be right now. But now I think that now that the gates have been opened, no, we're just starting, no? And hopefully this will be sustained. It will continue to essentially escalate in a way, no? Not escalate in terms of armed conflict, but rather escalate in terms of our imagination and innovation in using all the various peaceful mechanisms that are available to us, no? Not just directly in relation to the South China Sea, but elsewhere, no? So, for example, against illegal fishing, there are many other ways by which we can skin that cat.
Yeah.
Against this clam digging, all these environmentally destructive methods that have been let loose on the West Philippine Sea, there's a lot as well that we can do. So hopefully this will continue now that we're becoming
I think the data
more
was by
comfortable
the
with it.
Philippine Marine Science Institute of around $600 million of annual damage to our resources and ecology. I saw a study like that, and that's a conservative
Yes, that's a
estimate.
conservative estimate.
Just to monetize it so that people appreciate it. Because, we had a former president who kept on saying, oh, we're going to get billions of dollars of investments from China. Maybe we have to be nice a little bit in the West Philippines. And I always remind them, look at what we're actually losing. Forget about the pledge drop. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we got a lot of promises. That's what we got.
That's good enough for
Just
some people,
promises.
apparently. Yes, Colonel Powell, what is your sense about the public diplomacy game? How important it was for the media, for thought leaders, for your institute, AMTI, our friends in the CSIs, to shed light on the shenanigans that were happening sometimes on a daily basis, right, by hundreds of militia forces from we know who, right? How important is that, and how important do you think this is continuing? I mean, and also a side question, maybe you want to do also a YouTube career, because I think the video you had a while ago was really good, right? I think we want to see more of that in the near future.
I did not make the video.
Yeah.
We live in an open society. We in the United States, you in the Philippines, Australia, other places, we live in open societies. An open society can feel like a weakness, right? Because there are all these pressures, the political back and forth. We don't do things efficiently, right? But it's also our superpower. So when you talk about a gray zone actor, and I know you before I said they want it to be gray because that's where they can speak directly to the elites and they can say, if you want things to be comfortable and cooperative and non-confrontational and stable, you'll work with us under our terms. And that's the way everybody can be happy. But if, so having public opinion speak out, it's not just holding our leaders accountable, which we have to do in a democracy, but it's also empowering our leaders to say, I can't, look, you guys shined a laser at us. And there's this clown out at Stanford in his pajamas tweeting out things about what's going on. We have to do something because our people demand it. And that's actually a great, I have to always give credit to the Philippines for what has happened this year has been extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And it's extraordinary what the Philippine government has dared to do. But the pressure on the government has to be also extraordinary because they're going to get those messages. They're going to get them directly from the Chinese embassy. They'll get them from Chinese officials. They'll get them from business leaders because these messages go through all kinds of different avenues to say, shut up, get in line. Where did the compliance go? So public opinion is absolutely crucial in an open society to standing up to the bully.
Right. Thank you. I really appreciated especially the ending of the presentation about how the Philippines contributed to the international community, but what it did. I think the coffee was a bit too much. I'm talking faster than. But the thing is this: we did a lot for ASEAN. I mean, for heaven's sake, the Vietnamese, the Malaysians, even the Indonesians right now, right, are leveraging our arbitration award to stand their ground. The whole position of Indonesia in the North Natuna Sea, in one way or another, is related to us rejecting their 9-dash line and China's notion of a traditional fishing rights in God knows where, right? And the Malaysians, when they filed for extended continental shelf in late 2019, they essentially were invoking our arbitration award. So we helped the rest of ASEAN. And to be honest, here in the Philippines, we want to make sure we get enough love in return. But that's a totally different conference and beyond my pay grade. Are there any questions in the crowd? Yes, Professor.
Ray, I would like to direct my questions to my Filipino colleagues who have studied Philippine foreign policy. It has to do with your reaction or comments regarding, although the government has done a lot of things, but sometimes I felt disturbed by some comments. So if I could ask you to give your comments regarding two statements that have been coming from the government in general. Number one, the foreign policy rhetoric of friends to all, enemies to none. If you could basically give your opinion. And of course, this one statement come from a legislator. I won't have to mention the person's name, that we have to treat the United States and China equally, especially in terms of their presence of their ship and aircraft in our territory. Can I ask your comments regarding those two statements?
Thank you, Professor De Castro, for that. Yes, Justice Carpio, I mean, can you be friends to enemies?
I will answer the.
Yeah.
I will reverse.
I just had to push it.
Well, on the statement that we should strictly monitor the U.S. and its allies when they sail in the West Philippine Sea in the same manner that we are now strictly monitoring the Chinese when they sail in the West Philippine Sea. Well, the answer to that is simple. When China sails in the West Philippine Sea, China says, we sail here because the West Philippine Sea is ours. All the fish, oil, and gas belong to China. It does not belong to the Philippines. We don't recognize the Arbitral Award. When the U.S. and its allies sail in the West Philippine Sea, they say, we can sail here because the Arbitral Award says this is the EEZ of the Philippines. We do not claim this. It belongs to the Philippines under that Arbitral Award. So these are two different concepts. China is sailing because they are claiming what belongs to us. The Americans are sailing because they are protecting what belongs to us. So you cannot put them on the same footing. I mean, it's just totally insane to say that we should also tighten the rules on the Americans. We should, in fact, join the Americans when they sail in the West Philippine Sea because that enforces the Arbitral Award. That whenever they sail there, they tell China, this is the EEZ of the Philippines under the Arbitral Award. We should join them. On your second question on friends to all and enemy to none, well, that's not how the world is put together. I mean, can you just imagine Ukraine saying, we are friends to all and enemy to none, despite what Russia is doing to us? When your neighbor is invading your territory, seizing your maritime zones, you cannot say that your neighbor is your friend. You can say that sarcastically, but you cannot say that honestly. So how can we say that China is our friend when China is getting our fish, preventing us from getting our gas when we need the gas desperately, occupying our island territories in the West Philippine Sea, depriving us from our right to fish in Scarborough Shoal? How can you call that country a friend? So I think we should, if you call that country a friend, how will our people say, oh, it's just too inconceivable that you are actually telling China, go ahead, friend, continue what you're doing because you're our friend. So I think that's just a hollow slogan. I mean, we can say that if nobody is coveting our territory or maritime zones, we can grandly say we are friend to all and enemy to all. That is a work in progress. If China recognizes our maritime zones and island territories in the South China Sea, then we can say, honestly, we are a friend to all and enemy to none.
I think maybe that Friends to All Enemy to None could be a good replacement for a tourism campaign. Instead of Love the Philippines, yeah, Friends to All, come and spend in the. I just thought about it. I'll tweet it later on. Actually, I realized I was writing a book about China and ASEAN, and my chapter in Singapore, I realized actually Singapore was, I think, the first one who came with the idea like that. So let me run it with the plagiarism department. Jay,
Yeah.
false equivalence.
Yeah.
That's the point of.
Yeah.
Justice. Is it
Yeah.
false equivalence? What's the problem there?
On this close monitoring thing, I mean, once I heard about it, I knew it was gaslighting. Because if it's an American aircraft moving through the Philippines, the movements of American military aircraft, especially, and troops are always under the coverage of the MDB-SEB, the system that's in place that oversees implementation of the MDT and the VFA. So you can bet that those movements have always had are always get the clearance basically of this joint mechanism that we have between the Philippines and the United States because it's covered by the agreement. So maybe it's someone else that they want to benefit by monitoring this. No, it's not the Philippines, but somebody else who wants to benefit from monitoring these
Right.
movements. With respect to the friends to all, enemies to none slogan, I think it's really an aspiration, and it applies for
Right.
areas of our relations because after all countries have complex relations. It applies to areas of relations where you do not have any dispute or conflict. But clearly, it won't be applicable in cases of policy issues that are disputed. You cannot be friends to all if you, as Justice Carpio says, you cannot be friends with, or friends to the max, shall we say, with a country that is actually coveting your territory. You have to be, it's common sense, it's practical. So that's why I think of it more as an aspiration. And I also think that, if I can recall correctly, the first time I heard this phrase was from Secretary Locsin, friends to all, enemies to none. But he also sort of amplified it later by saying something along the lines of real enemies to false friends.
Okay,
Stuff like that. No?
He does that.
Yeah,
right?
diba? So I
Ambassador
think that
Locsin does
volatility
that.
gets
Yeah.
overlooked,
Yeah.
which is probably understandable because after all, if you're trying to conduct diplomacy and foreign relations, you do
Right.
not want to be seeding conflict and hurting feelings, quote unquote. But you want to present an air of cordiality and politeness at least. So that's how I look at it. It's in that context. Thank you.
That's why better for a tourism campaign than foreign policy and high-stake geopolitics. Is there any last question? Yes, lady on the right. Thanks, Professor.
Perhaps to everyone in the panel, Buena Bernal, Philippines correspondent for CNA Channel News Asia. So I recently visited Kalayaan Island Group, And the fishermen there tell me that the Philippine Navy themselves, the local government unit, and the Philippine Coast Guard there are disallowing them to go to Sandy Cay to venture out there for their safety. The mayor confirmed as much. Now, they also say that whenever they go, Chinese vessels are blocking them. So that's a disincentive. But at the same time, there's also a de facto policy from the Philippine side. So, first question is, do you think this is a good policy? And the second question, as you will see in our documentary on the South China Sea airing tonight, 9:30 p.m. SGT, sorry for the plug,
Hashtag.
is that underwater in the Spratlys, at least in the Calayan Island groups, we saw lifeless sediment-covered coral as far as the eyes can see. So my question is, which you will see tonight, what do you think is the best way forward in terms of streamlining marine protection policies? Because different countries have different fishing ban periods. The Philippines wants that area to be a marine protected area, but it's not just Filipino fishermen fishing there.
Yeah, if could I could tie that into this whole theme of how can we collectively help the Philippines, right? How can the international community help the Philippines? Because this is about the rules-based order, right? Colonel Powell. Okay, you wanna go last? Okay, Jay, you wanna go first?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I've also been there, and I've seen exactly what you've seen. With respect to Sandy Cay, I think it's more of a practical or pragmatic policy. It does not necessarily reflect legal opinion or legal positions. Because when you are in the Pag-asa Island, no, and you look around, it's very hard because you're really quite isolated from the rest. And if there was an incident and actions needed to be taken, it would take hours before it arrives. It could take hours before it arrives, by which time the incident might have been resolved against you. So I guess that's simply a practical policy on the part of the island commander and the people there, no? Because it's true. Whenever somebody approaches Sandy Cay, that this humongous Coast Guard ship moves to block it. And it's so easy for a bangka. Many of the bangkas there are only good for two people, maybe. It's easy for that to be sunk just by the waves, that are generated by these large vessels. What more if it's really deliberately targeted? No? So I think that's the idea there, really. Safety first. No? But that does not mean that it is a legal position or legal policy, I think. No? And that also means that maybe from time to time, which I know has happened, we do go there. No? Of course, it could create a ruckus, but at least we still do. On the implementation, what things that you can do? No? I think in order to establish the foundation for things like those, yung management, better marine protection initiatives, even budget, no? We first have to enact the maritime zone law, which will also allow us to clearly now delineate the maritime zones around each one of these islands on their respective territorial seas. And through that, we can then also divide our own internal zones like municipal waters vis-a-vis the national waters. That will, again, be an implementation of the award because we are implementing our rights. And at the same time, it's implementation of national law. We're laying the foundation for how we're going to manage these areas in accordance with our own laws like any other place in the Philippines. And as you know, we do have quite a lot of initiatives, a lot of policies on marine environment protection. We have protected landscapes and seascapes. We have coastal management projects, initiatives, policies, search, so many things we can use. No? And all of them have been done, no? On the assumption that these zones of jurisdiction, division between local and national jurisdiction, application of particular laws, particular norms, all of that is on the basis of the existence of these maritime zones. And that's why it's an important first step towards implementing the award, and then as well as asserting and actually exercising our rights and entitlements in that area. Other than that, these are national efforts, of course, but once you have that as the basis, then it becomes a bit easier to then take the next step of now trying to engage in cooperative projects with other countries or other nations, other entities, whether they're private organizations or whatnot, to then do these things with us. So that will help, again, get support and interest from other groups, even if they're not nations, even if they're just international NGOs. having that certainty with respect to what rules are applicable is necessary for them to be able to do that. Thank you.
Justice Carper, I think you're the one who popularized the whole Sandy K thing. I remember we didn't know about that thing at all.
Well, I have nothing to add on the fishing side.
Colonel Powell?
Well, just on, gaining international support, of course, I think that that's one of the most important, again, back to superpowers. One of the Philippine superpowers is you have a lot of friends. You have one treaty ally, but you have so many friends, so many of them showed up here today, and gaining international support has been one of the really, really great things to watch this year. As you've seen, all of the statements that came in today from embassies and from other governments. And so activating that in terms of something like, ecological revitalization and those kinds of things. One thing that I think that we did see back during the island building campaign was we saw a very muted response from a lot of the NGOs. You can speculate as to why that was. One imagines that there was probably a lot of pressure on them. So governments can step in various ways to lend support in ways that are not obviously provocative. I mean, obviously, if a country wants to be provoked, it will be provoked. But to come in and say, we want to help you with this ecological revitalization campaign, I think that's a very positive way and a very constructive way to approach the issue from, in something that, what reasonable country could disagree that this is a good thing?
On that note, thank you very much. I think there was another fantastic homage to Secretary Albert de Rosario. I'm sure he's very proud of the energy and commitment that we're seeing here. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much again, Justice Antonio Carpio, Colonel Ray Powell, Dr. J. Batong Bakal, and Mr. Richard Heydarian. All right. I just saw a tweet from Inquirer saying that aside from the troops in Ayungin Shoal, we are also being watched right now by our troops in the Pag-asa Island. So you'd like to greet our military personnel from the Pag-asa Island. Yeah. Thank you very much for your service. All right, so we're down to our last two speeches for the day. It's been a very, very insightful day so far. And at this point, we are pleased to share with you a very special pre-recorded message prepared by the Philippine Ambassador to the United States, His Excellency Jose Manuel Babe Romualdez. Let's all listen in.
Professor Victor Andres Dindo Manhit, President of the Strat-based ADR Institute, Your Excellencies, Ambassador to the Republic of the Philippines, Justice Antonio Carpio, former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the Philippines, Honorable Maria Teresa Lazaro, the Undersecretary for Bilateral Relations and the ASEAN Affairs of the Department of Foreign Affairs, distinguished panelists, friends, ladies and gentlemen, let me extend my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Manhit and his team at the Strat-based ADR Institute for inviting me to speak at this distinguished town hall discussion. I also would like to congratulate them for organizing this event on the exact date of the 7th anniversary of the issuance of the final award on the South China Sea arbitration, a case brought out by the Republic of the Philippines against the People's Republic of China. My congratulations and appreciation also goes to all of our experts and panelists who shared their valuable insights and perspectives throughout the day, as well as to all our friends and partners who supported this event in one way or another. 7 years ago, on this very day, the Philippines, and indeed the rest of the world, witnessed the validation of one of the fundamental principles that underpin the relations among states in modern history: the equality of nations before international law. The landmark ruling of Arbitral Tribunal on July 12, 2016, stands as a testament that all nations, regardless of their size or power, have equal recourse to the law and that their rights and entitlements are protected not by the might of their military forces, but by the supremacy of the rule of law. The significance of this arbitral ruling cannot be overstated. It has become an integral part of the international law, setting legal precedents for future similar cases that may be brought before the international legal bodies. The decision points of the award have provided clarity on several important aspects of the South China Sea disputes, providing a clearer understanding of the definition of various features in the South China Sea according to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or the UNCLOS, and the corresponding entitlements. The ruling now serves as a legal basis for the positions and policies adopted by countries concerning their activities in the South China Sea. Finally, we are firmly convinced that future generations will be able to look back on this case as having significantly contributed to peace, stability, and security in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. Since 2016, a number of countries and the European Union have issued statements in support of the arbitral ruling, emphasizing the importance of respecting the decision. Today, some of these nations are represented here by their ambassadors, who have participated as panelists in various sessions of this town hall discussion. I would like to take this opportunity and a moment to echo the expressions of appreciation to your governments for this invaluable support. We hope that such support will endure and that more countries will join in affirming this ruling, thus further strengthening and solidifying the international community's commitment and adherence to a rule-based order. However, it is crucial to acknowledge that the award itself would not have been possible without the Philippines filing the case before the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And for this highly significant undertaking, I would like to take this opportunity to pay my utmost respect to our late Foreign Secretary, Albert del Rosario, who led the Philippine government in pursuing the arbitration case against China in 2013. I was deeply saddened, like many others who knew and worked with him, by his passing last April. Secretary del Rosario was a true and good friend of mine. He was, in fact, the one who persuaded me when I was offered the job of becoming the Philippine ambassador to the United States by then President Duterte to accept the position. While Secretary del Rosario will undoubtedly be remembered for his numerous accomplishments, including his success in business and his notable achievements as a diplomat, both here in Washington, D.C. as Philippine ambassador to the United States and as Secretary of Foreign Affairs, I firmly believe that one of his most significant and enduring legacies, not only for the Philippines, but for the broader international community, is the arbitration case on the South China Sea. Let me also acknowledge Justice Antonio Carp, a brilliant lawyer and an outstanding justice of the Supreme Court. Even though he has retired from the bench, he has continued to make significant contributions to legal jurisprudence, particularly in the area of international maritime law. Through his research and analysis of the legal issues surrounding the South China Sea disputes. Not only has he skillfully presented and argued for the Philippine rights under the law of the sea through his numerous lectures and publications all over the world, he has also raised awareness among Filipinos regarding the South China Sea disputes and their impact on the Philippines and the Filipino people. As we celebrate the 7th anniversary of the Arbitral Award, let us not forget those individuals whose hard work, dedication, and profound love for their country made this milestone possible. May their enduring legacy inspire future generations to protect and uphold the rights of the nation in the face of formidable challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Babe Romualdez. So it's been a very productive and informative day so far. And to finally and officially close our event, we are honored to have with us the Acting Secretary and Undersecretary for Civilian Security and Consular Affairs at the Department of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Jesus Gary Domingo. Let's give him a round of applause.
Excellencies, member of the Diplomatic Corps, friends from the academe, think tanks, the press, and my colleagues in the Philippine government, good afternoon. First, I would like to thank Stratbase ADR Institute, ADRi, led by my good friend, Professor Dindo Manhit, for organizing this conference with our partners entitled The Seventh Year of the Arbitral Victory, Defending the West Philippine Sea, the Indo-Pacific, and the Rules-Based Order, and for inviting me to deliver the closing remarks for this event. So I'd like to thank everyone for your participation for the commemoration of the 2016 Arbitral Award and for honoring the legacy of my late boss, Secretary Albert Del Rosario, as we fondly know as ADR. ADR was an inspiration for us who had the privilege of serving with him in the DFA. For those of us who grew up in the bureaucracy, his leadership style, which asked for rival ideas to be interrogated and debated in front of him so he could make informed decisions, was startling and bracing. It energized the DFA and inspired the organization that serves as our host today, the Stratbase ADRi. So we listened to the discussions today, and we know that ADR would have enjoyed the rich discourse, which built on what he fought for in his principled approach to an independent foreign policy, defending the West Philippine Sea, the Indo-Pacific, and the rules-based order. Indeed, the rule of law in the oceans, as it is on air, land, and space, is the only basis on which we can collectively move forward. In the department's statement released today to mark the 7th anniversary of the award, we spoke of the role of anniversaries in reminding us not just of how the righteous path that we, as a people, have chosen to take, but also to evaluate how far we have come in upholding the strength of our reason. By choosing arbitration as a way of peacefully resolving conflict, the Philippines has charted a road along the straight and narrow path of principle and the rule of law. That judgment was validated by the tribunal's ruling. The award has allowed us to chart new courses, and according to the deep maritime roots of our nation and its people and our steadfast belief in the inviolability of our jurisdictional claims, fully aligned with UNCLOS. At the start of the process, before the decision was made to file in 2013, and for years, the years it took to a decision, there were moments that the Philippines felt it stood alone. We are heartened that in the 7 years since the award, the number of countries that have expressed support for the rule of law, and specifically for the 2016 Arbitral Award, has been growing. Perhaps that is due to the growing number of opinions from experts, such as those who are with us today, who have studied the strategy and the outcome and have appreciated the clarity that the award provides on the questions of maritime entitlements, among others. There is a majesty to be found in the awards being definitive and final. No threat of might can challenge its undeniable status, and no subversive manipulation can diminish its conclusive truths. The Philippines is proud to contribute to the practice of international law, and welcome the support expressed by the international community. Allow me thus to reiterate the key points of our country's position. 1. The Philippines follows an independent foreign policy guided primarily by the national interest. 2. The Philippine position on the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea, has been clear and consistent, firmly anchored on the 1982 United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea and the final and binding 2016 Arbitral Award on the South China Sea. 3rd, the Philippines abides by its international obligations, including those under the United Nations Charter and the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. We likewise uphold the 1982 Manila Declaration on the peaceful settlement of international disputes. 4th, during his state visit to China in January 2023, His Excellency President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. agreed with Chinese President Xi Jinping that maritime issues do not comprise the totality of our bilateral relations between Manila and Beijing. However, such issues remain of great concern to the Philippines and our bilateral relations. 5th, the Philippines and China continue to communicate and engage each other on a number of priority areas, including agriculture, infrastructure, trade, science and technology, and people-to-people relations. 6th, the DFA, in coordination with other Philippine agencies, remains steadfast in the monitoring of the situation at sea and stands ready to protest against violations of Philippine sovereignty, sovereign rights, and jurisdiction. And 7th, We continue to call on all international partners to voice support for the award, as the award is now a cornerstone of international law and is a clear testament that diplomacy and dialogue do work. Finally, I note that perhaps our most important constituency for understanding the South China Sea arbitration and the 2016 Arbitral Award is not among the participants here today, but are those who have not been privileged to join us in this discussion. It is for them that the department has created a website, and our colleagues from Moao, really has many sleepless nights, created a website specifically focused on the 2016 Arbitral Award, which we have launched today. I invite you to view it, to visit it, and which, although it's a work in progress, it's there. And we look forward to improving the site and look forward to your contributions in this regard. So, ADRi Institute and our friends here today, maraming salamat po. Thank you, and I can lose my speech. Thank you.
All right. And on that note, thank you very much to everyone who joined us today on the 7th year of the Arbitral Victory. To our speakers, distinguished guests from the government, the diplomatic community, the academe, the media, and the think tanks who joined us here in the venue in person, and also those who watched us live from Zoom and Facebook. We look forward to having you again with us here next year on the 8th anniversary. But before you go for now, more immediately, we would like to invite you all to join us in our next event next week. That's on July 17, Monday, entitled Philippine Water Management Agenda, Ensuring Sustainability and Security. So that next week, we will be talking about the national government's water management agenda. Quite a different topic, right? So again, this has been Joyce Ilas. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. May we invite the afternoon session speakers, please, to join us on stage for a photo opportunity? Lapitan.